Hello everyone, this is Patrick. In this presentation I'm going to talk about source code control. So source code control is a set of tools that's going to help you manage your HTML, your CSS, and if you're writing it, your JavaScript files. So that way you can make changes over time without losing any of the state of those files that you have at some milestone within your project. It's also going to help you do collaboration between other developers, and it's going to really free you up to be creative without risking losing some of the established content that you have. So I'll talk about those scenarios, and I'll briefly touch on some tools that you'll want to take advantage of in your development environment that'll help you take advantage of source code control. So this is really geared towards a specific viewership. I'm doing this presentation for a group of web design students. So they typically come from an art background. At this point in time, they've done some HTML and some CSS. So I want to expand upon how they can do these tasks by integrating source code control so that they can take advantage of the benefits that source code control provides. But in general, what's important about the demographic that I'm targeting is that they really don't consider themselves to be software developers. So I don't envision that you write source code for a living. If you write JavaScript, maybe that's about as close as you get. But you don't think of yourself as a software developer. So you're probably you might avoid tools that you consider to be targeted at software developers. But what I really want to do is I want to promote source code development, source code management tools, because I think even at HTML and CSS levels, being able to manage changes to those files over time is really important. Beyond that, so coming from web design background, you're probably using Mac. So the examples that I give in terms of the tools, I'll gear toward the Mac, so that way I'll be recommending things that you can use right away. You don't have to switch platforms in order to take advantage of them. So that's the important aspect of who you are today. But what I also want to get into is who you'll be in the future. So sometime soon you're going to be a professional designer. So if you continue on in web design, you'll either probably not right out of school be working independently. You might be working for a firm, but someday down the road you're going to be doing some more advanced web development. And I would guess that when you go into one of those environments, you're going to be using these tools either out of the box or somewhere down the road. So I think source code management tools are something you will encounter if you go into web design. But at that point, you still won't think of yourself as a software developer. You'll probably be focused on the front-end design, but I think you'll be interacting with these tools. So having the background understanding of when they're important and when they're not is something that I think you'll benefit from. So in general, when we think about any platform, you really want to think about the users and you want to think about what their goals are. So the context and how they'll be going about their tasks. It's really important to think about what the real goal is. So in general, you want to produce amazing web content. You want to provide your users some amazing experience, and that's what you really want to do. That's your goal. But along the way, unfortunately, you need to provide the foundation of that, and that's your source code. So that's your HTML, your CSS, and those things. It's other web artifacts, so it could be SVG content, it could be images. So you need to manage these things. And as you're going through your development, these things are going to change over time. So what you really want to be able to do is work effectively and efficiently, either by yourself or within a team. So source code management tools are going to help you do this, and I'll start to explain why. So as a developer, you're going to encounter a couple different scenarios. So if I had to describe the analogy for why you want to use source code tools, I think if I could describe layers within a design tool, I would say that for a lot of projects you can get by without layers, but I think once you start using layers, that's when you can become more effective in doing your design. You can protect yourself against loss of concepts. You turn a layer on, you implement a concept in that layer, you can then turn it off and produce another layer that has an alternative of that concept. So I think if you consider that design is possible without layers, you can also do software development without source code management tools. But I think in the end, the learning process that is required will get you over that hurdle. And once you understand it, it'll be something that'll be more intuitive for you. So specifically, you're going to want to manage regressions while you're doing source code development. So a regression is just a fancy word for it used to work and now it's broken. So you want to be able to handle those scenarios where you had something that was functional and now for some reason or another it doesn't work anymore. So your source code management tools are going to allow you to go backwards in time and look at the different iterations of a file that you're working on. If it's a CSS file, you'll be able to see those changes as you implement them, and you'll be able to identify more quickly what went wrong instead of having to remember what the file used to look like before I started making changes. Your source code tools are going to provide that for you. So that's managing regressions, which is the primary benefit of using a source code management tool. Additionally, source code tools are going to help you collaborate with other developers. So again, if you're working independently, that's one example. However, I want to advise that even if you're working by yourself, a year from now, the changes you made to a file are going to probably not be present in your brain anymore. So you're really going to want to be able to collaborate with yourself at a different point in time. So the obvious scenario would be, okay, you've got a team of developers that need to collaborate, but often you're going to be collaborating with yourself just in the future. So it's really important to be able to track changes over time and remember why changes were made. So that's an important part of it. You're going to want to leave notes to either someone else or yourself, and your source code tools are going to provide that for you. And then finally, I think if I can really hook you on this, it's really that source code tools allow you to embrace creativity. They really allow you to go off on a risky path without little repercussions if that path doesn't really pan out. So I'm going to go through some examples here that kind of drill down into these three use cases a little bit further, so that way we can discuss why these use cases are really important. So first, in managing regression, so let's take an example where you have an HTML file, and for one reason or another, maybe somebody else wrote this file, and all the style content is right in your HTML file. So what you want to do is you want to move that out into a CSS file, which is going to allow you to strip those styles out of your HTML file and put them where they're supposed to be, which is in your CSS. So your HTML file at this point in time is functional. It does what it's supposed to do. It's styled correctly, and now you're going to go ahead and move it. And there's a risk that you're going to break something along the way. So especially if you start to optimize as you move your style out, if you when you have a bunch of elements that are styled in line, you can probably optimize that to be a little bit more class restrictive. So as you do this, the likelihood that you'll break one thing or another, something's not going to present quite the way it did originally. What is your fallback? So you might have a number of backup files you keep on USB sticks. So what a source code tool does is it really gives you a full history of the file of changes you've made over time. So if you take an original timestamp of a file, so we're going to work from the bottom of this little node graph. So this index.html file, your source code tools are going to track every change. So every circle in this node map is going to be a change that's committed to your source code tools. So the original looks good so far. You're going to move to a 6-column grid. You commit that to the source code control tool. You then present that design to your client. They like it. You commit that change. And then you start moving your style sheets around to separate the inline content. Now, if this is where you run into a problem between these two file changes here, you really want to be able to look at what's happened between them. And what the source code tool is going to do is it's going to show you a side-by-side comparison of the files before and after, and it's really going to give you a great representation of what exactly has changed. So you'll be able to go back and you'll be able to see the changes that happened, and you'll be able to go and fix the CSS code that you wrote, so that way they more appropriately represent what the original HTML had. So that's really how you go ahead and manage regressions in a source code control system. So what it's going to do is it's going to track every version along the way. you're going to have to specify when to track a version. You're going to specify this is, version 1.0, this is 1.1. You're going to be responsible for specifying that. But the tool is going to allow you to go back through any level of history, comparing any two files, and look at the changes between them. So you can go all the way from the top all the way to the bottom and look at the changes that have happened along the way. If you're smart, you'll leave messages along the way. But at this point, either yourself or anyone else can look at the whole history of the file. So that way if something goes wrong, you can more quickly identify what happened and resolve it. So the second scenario, that's your collaboration scenario. So again, originally we were talking about a situation where you had, it was just you working and you wanted to track changes over time. So now we're going to go to a situation where there's another developer that you're working with as well. So if we start with an example where you've written the first 3 versions of a given file, and then the new developer starts to collaborate, and they work on that 4th iteration. So that collaborator can now see the whole history of the things that you've done on your side, and you can also see the things that they're doing on their side. So it allows you to more easily integrate a team instead of sharing USB sticks or copying a group of files to Google Drive and then downloading and uploading. So it really works with a shared system that allows you to do this collaboration in a fluid way. So in your current development environment, you're probably sitting side by side with the people that you're collaborating with. Maybe that's how you would work in an office environment. But you may encounter situations where you're working in a completely different country than your collaborators. So those are the kind of environments that I work in, where I've got people I collaborate with in Germany, in Switzerland, in the UK, Australia. And it's not that just they're not sitting next to me, but they're also in a different time zone. So I can't, if I've got a question at 5 o'clock, I can't contact them right away. So I'm going to rely on that source code control system to give me the history of changes that either I've made in the past or that they've made on their own, so that way I can get an idea of what has happened. I can't count on being able to communicate with a person at all times. So they're either not located with me, or they might be not located with me in time. So I might need some tool to get me by, and source code control is going to provide that. So systems like Google Drive, they provide comments, but source code management really gives you comments all along the way. So each of these different versions of a file is going to be commented, so that way you can see the changes over time more easily. And then if we go back to the regressions example, you're going to be able to compare 2 files side by side, so that way you can see exactly what's changed. And those are the kind of facilities that you really don't have in a system like Google Drive or any of those other online collaborative document development systems. So the third scenario that I wanted to cover was embracing creativity. So this is a really important one, in that it really saves you time if you want to experiment with something. So if I started with the basic example of you want to either drastically change how a composition looks, but you're not really sure if it's going to work out. You're not set on the idea yet. So without source code control tools, you're either going to make a backup of your original, go down a route, and then just drop it. Or probably the worst way to do that would be to just work on your original file set and then undo when you decide that you don't like the changes that you've made. So you really want a system where you can be as creative as possible and then just throw it away. So probably the copy and paste of a folder is the best example. But then you start to have too many balls in the air when you're trying to make these changes. So you really want something that supports this experimentation model a little bit better. So if we follow this node diagram, at the bottom again, we've got the original, we move to our 6-column grid, and then we want to go off on this experiment, and we call that a branch, and we want to experiment with a new color palette. So we're going to produce a branch of our existing file history, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to play with that new design. And our original design is protected because it's split away from this new line of development we're going to encounter. So we can play with this new color palette, and then we can start playing with type scale, and we can do whatever we want. And the original is protected, and it's maintained by the server. And the nice thing as well is that all these changes that you do in your branch, you're still making your comments all along the way, and anybody that wants to look at this branch can view it. So that's where the copy paste folder structure kind of falls apart in a basic development system, where if you just make a copy and then start making changes to the copy, your ability to collaborate and your ability to do regression testing is a little bit more difficult. So the branch allows everyone to continue collaborating. It allows you to continue evaluating your regressions. And at the end of it, if you go ahead and you're working on this branch and you determine, hey, I really like this alternative, you can just merge all that code that you've written back to the main line and then start using it. Whereas in the opposite direction, if you determine, hey, I don't like this, you can just leave the branch where it is. Now, none of that work is lost. You've just decided that you're not going to bring it back across the line to your main platform. So it allows you to go off to your experiment, and at the end, it very easily integrates back with the main code, or it just stays out where it was. You can still go back and get it. Maybe you liked the color palette, you didn't like the type scale. So you have those different levels, and that's again where I start. When I came up with the analogy that this is like layers in a system, you're building layers on top of one another, and you can strip back layers, you can turn them on and off, but they're all still preserved. They're there so that way you can utilize them as you need to. So I think, again, reviewing the scenarios, we have our original, which is managing regression. So if you break something along the way, you can more quickly get back. And that's where I started talking about efficiency. It's really about efficiency. If you break something, you can pretty efficiently get back to where you were. Collaboration, that helps protect against yourself across time or other collaborators. And then creativity, it really frees you up to be as creative as possible without the risk of the time needed to roll back, so you don't have to undo, or remember what it looked like. It really supports that creativity that you'll want to integrate into your designs. So to briefly go, I'm not going to go too deep in this. I'm not even going to cover go over use of these actual systems in this video. I may do a live demo when I present this to my class. But really, source code control is rooted on a server somewhere. So in typical scenarios, the server is either internal to a company, hosted on a server somewhere, or in a lot of other scenarios, it could be hosted up in the cloud on some third-party platform. So there's a server that holds onto all your source code. And within that server is all your source code files. So that's your HTML, your CSS, maybe your SVG, which is text-based, so you can do the comparisons like we talked about earlier. Your JavaScript. So the server is going to hold all these files, and what it's also going to do is it's going to hold the changes to those files over time. To interact with those files and those versions, you're going to have some collection of tools. So you're going to have a tool that does that side-by-side file comparison that I was talking about. You're going to have your main development tools that you actually modify your files in. And then you'll have tools that integrate the files back into the server. So there's a couple tools that you'll use along the way in order to have a source code control system that provides what you need to do your development activities. So those are the basics, but the other part of it, and that's when you start, when you get your first position as a web developer, or even if you're working on your own, there's going to be some policies that are agreed upon between the developers. So in my example of working with developers overseas, we have agreements on how we what text we use in our messages, how we number our versions. We have, if we wanted to stamp something as version 1.0, we have a naming convention for that. So we have a lot of policies that kind of govern how to use the source code control system, and that's as important as the tools, because if everybody uses their own system, you're really not a cohesive team. So you need to come up with some kind of policies. So what you might encounter is when you get into that first job, you might encounter some policies that talk about what server we use, what tools we use, when we commit changes, what tools we use for comparing two files. So there's going to be some policies that govern this whole system. So again, targeting Mac developers, I'm going to recommend just if you wanted to get started, and what you might find in the professional world is that there might be all these users that are working together, and they use tools like GitHub and Brackets. So Brackets is your development tool that is an Adobe product for doing HTML, CSS coding. So there's a tool that integrates with Brackets. It's called Brackets Git. So this is just a plugin for the Brackets development environment that allows you to integrate with any Git server, and GitHub is an example of that. So GitHub is an online source code repository. It's free for 5 projects, and then if you want, you can have private projects. So a private project being one that just everybody in the world can't see. You have to be invited to a project. You have to invite collaborators. Whereas a public repository, anybody can see it. So maybe if you wanted to do some HTML code and use that as part of your I'm missing a word here. You want to show this to potential employers. A public repository is something that will allow you to do that. So you put your code in there. GitHub tracks the changes to the files over time. GitHub manages all of those branches that you might develop. And you can invite collaborators. People can see your code. People can review your code. And you can go about doing your development in that environment. So Brackets Git is the conduit between your Brackets development environment and GitHub. So when you make a change to a file and you say, okay, I think this is a good milestone, you'll use Brackets Git to push that change up to GitHub. And then anybody that's watching your project will be able to see that change. And you'll be able to go back and see those changes as well, so you can compare those files. So that's the basic tool set that, given the developers that I've been working with, the designers that I've been working with, I think coming from a Mac context, these would be a good starting point. I don't have a terrible amount of experience with other tools inside the Mac environment that might be useful. So I've used Brackets Git a little bit. It seems to do what I need it to. I tend to do all of my GitHub integration from command line tools. So the facilities of Brackets Git may not be something that I would really take advantage of, but I think they're good. They provide the comparison of files. So as you're modifying a file, you can see right within Brackets the changes that have been made to that file over time. So if you're in the middle of a change set and you want to see, hey, what did the original look like? Show me that. It'll really give you a good visual representation of the exact changes that have occurred. So if you're just working in a text editor, you don't have any of those kind of facilities. So if you're already using Brackets, Brackets Git would be something that would be useful. If you're not using Brackets, I don't really have any recommendations right now, but maybe if anybody has comments, they can leave them. So I'll break there. I think I've covered the use cases. Again, that's your regressions, your collaboration, and your branching, your creativity. I've given you some examples of where to get started, so I would recommend if you don't have a GitHub account and you're doing source code development, go get a GitHub account. It's free. Get some experience with that. It's a really great community. There's a lot of people out there that are pushing for this model of development. There's lots to learn out there. There's lots of code in GitHub, so if you want to learn code, it's all in there. You can see changes that other people make to code over time, so you can see how people are using source code control tools, and GitHub is a really great resource for that. The community is great, and the tool is great as well. So again, if you're using Brackets, go ahead and download Brackets Git, give it a try. I think they're, both Brackets and Brackets Git are probably relatively new tools. If you're coming from a different environment and you're using something else, drop me a message and let me know if you have questions about other contexts. So that's about it. I think I've covered what I wanted to. If I get around to it in the near future, I'll go ahead and I'll do a demo of using GitHub and using Brackets Git. But I'm quite positive you're going to find lots of demos surrounding GitHub. I know that there's probably at least a couple good presentations around Brackets Git, so you can get a little bit of more detail on that. But I really wanted to just talk about, source code control in terms of the web designer. So I think it's something that, again, I wanted to make the point that you probably don't think of yourself as a source code developer. So you might look at a tool like a source code tool and you say, that's just not for me. That's a little bit too much. But I think There's a little bit of a learning curve, and once you get beyond that, you'll really benefit from it, and then it'll become second nature, and you won't think about it anymore. So I really want everyone to give it a try. GitHub is a very painless introduction to it, and I think you'll really benefit both in terms of efficiency and the output you produce. I think will be better because of that. So please go give those a try, and if you have any comments, leave them with this video. Thanks. Bye.